Welcome to the Jackson Rudolph podcast. I am your host, Jackson Rudolph, and this is episode 72, brought to you by the one and only, the legendary Black Belt Magazine. As you can see, I am still not back in any type of a studio. I'm in a hotel room once again because I am on the road, all types of traveling as we are finally starting to move out of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also getting some sport karate tournaments back in full swing. We just had the Battle of Atlanta this past weekend, and now just about a week and a half from now, we are getting ready for the U.S. Open, the premier event around the world for sport karate, the most prestigious, or arguably the most prestigious, because there's other great events too, martial arts tournament in the world is the U.S. Open. We have one of the promoters of the U.S. Open on the show tonight, Mr. Mike McCoy. Thank you so much for your time. I greatly appreciate it. I know that our audience appreciates it as well. And I want to start by just a little bit of a reflection on how great it was to be back in action at a sport karate tournament at the Battle of Atlanta. So maybe just some reflections from your point of view about the event.
It was awesome. I mean, the last event I went to that was of that caliber was the Compete Nationals of last year. So 16 months ago. I probably didn't know what to expect. I wasn't expecting what I saw. I didn't expect as many people. I didn't expect as much talent. And I think the most impressive thing is I didn't expect it to just seem like we never missed a beat. I mean, it could have been the event in March, right after the one in February in 2020. Everybody just, except for a few people, were still wearing face coverings. I get it. But for the most part, it just seemed like we were back doing what we do for the last 40 years, right?
Absolutely. No, that was something that I was surprised by as well, is how normal it felt. It didn't feel like there was any awkwardness about this 16-month hiatus from NASKA, North American Sport Karate Association competition. Like you said, it literally felt like Compete Nationals of 2020 was a month ago, and we were just coming to a tournament like we always do. You mentioned the talent level, and that's something that I was really impressed by, because it's not just competitors from before the pandemic that showed that they had continued to train hard and could still be at the top of their game. But we saw a lot of new faces at the Battle of Atlanta, whether it was competitors that maybe honed their skills on the NASKA or the sportmartialarts.com virtual tour, or whether they were traveling to Pro Mac tournaments while they were still hosting events. We saw a lot of new faces to the NASKA and ISKA arena. We saw a whole bunch of new faces come and kind of announce themselves as people who can become overall grand champions and world champions. And something that throughout my career, at least, that has been so important leading up to the U.S. Open is the Battle of Atlanta, because in most of the years, maybe all of the years that I've competed, the Battle of Atlanta has been the last tournament right before the U.S. Open. Right. And I think that the importance of placement and performance at Battle of Atlanta was even more exaggerated this year, of course, because we haven't had any other NASKA tournaments. Typically, we've had a whole half season, or sometimes even a little bit more, leading up to the U.S. Open. Here, we've had one tournament. So I want you to speak a little bit to the importance of those performances and the placements that we saw at the Battle of Atlanta, and how that leads into the selections for the Night of Champions at the U.S. Open. Because for those of you tuning in that may not know this, the Night of Champions finals that gets broadcast from the U.S. Open to various platforms, including ESPN, that is an invitational show only. You have to be invited. You have to earn your spot in competition leading up to and at U.S. Open to be invited to compete in the Night of Champions. So, Mr. McCoy, from your perspective, just kind of wrap up how important those performances at the Battle of Atlanta were, and how heavily the selection committee will weigh those performances as we approach the Night of Champions.
Well, and you remember this, that the selection process for the Night of Champions is based on 3 criteria. Are you a defending champion? Right? What's your current ranking with NASKA? And like you said, we usually have 6 events by now, right? We have a real good feel who's in the top of their game, right? And then anybody who has, some kind of unique performance at the U.S. Open that says, hey, look at me, and we'll put them on stage. But without any events for a year and a half, there's people that have retired. There's people that we didn't know if they're even coming back. So the Battle of Atlanta was just as much to see who was even coming back as it was to see the new faces. And for example, as you remember from the Battle of Atlanta, who won men and women's? Haley and Mason, who the last time they competed were under adults. So luckily, they both looked great. Rashad looked great. There were plenty of people up there that just were very entertaining. Connor Chastain's awesome. I mean, we got just as high a caliber talent, but they're unknown, right? How will they do on the pressure of being on stage? The Battle of Atlanta helps prove that too. They did great. So it was just good to see that the people that haven't been on the stage before, that are making a name for themselves, look like they're pretty darn good. The audiences will like them. But we have no idea who really is the odds-on favorite until we actually saw the Battle of Atlanta. So for the first time ever, and in the past, performance of the Battle of Atlanta didn't make that much of a difference, because coming out of the Battle of Atlanta was almost all predetermined unless somebody did exceptionally well at the Open, right? Because people who won the battle probably been winning all year long. Because it's foregone conclusion. But this year it was like a whole season rolled into one tournament. And it was just very good to see the caliber of the competitors. Some of them were known entities like Haley and Mason, who would not have predicted them to just step right in the ring and start winning, right? But then some other folks who stepped up, and for us, as trying to produce a show that is just as much for the non-martial artists as it is for the martial artists, it has to be entertaining. And there are some seriously entertaining people on stage at the Battle of Atlanta. So no matter what happens, I think we'll have a great show with the talent that we have. Even though people like yourself have retired, sort of, kind of, and we don't have the names that we had before, like Mackenzie and Reed and you. We have people that will step up, and the audience will be equally fascinated and will enjoy their performances.
Mm-hmm. The active phrase there is "sort of, kind of," because no one has said that I'm done yet, myself included. So
good.
As they say, when ESPN, gave me the nickname, and I credit Mike Sawyer for this as well, because I think it was his idea to call me the magician. But as they say, a magician never reveals his secret. So as far as my status for U.S. Open, everybody will have to wait and see what happens with that. But you bring up a couple of excellent points that I want to touch on here. Number one, a lot of these new faces, and we mentioned Haley and Mason, they're not new faces. They're just new faces to the adult division. They've performed on stage as juniors for years and years. Haley has won her side, the 14 to 17 girls division, 1 million times over. Mason's got a number of major titles as well. He's a Warrior Cup champion. He's won ISKAs before, I'm pretty sure. So these competitors have been there, done that. They're just now doing it in the adults, and kudos to them for doing so, because it's hard to do that. It's hard to go from the juniors right up into the adults, a deeper division with more talent, and be able to find success right away. So big props to Mason Stowell and Hayden Glass for those big wins. But one concern that I had about a lot of these newer faces that were coming up through the divisions and winning the runoffs that had never been on stage before, would they be able to handle the pressure of being on a stage when all the lights are on you? There's a much bigger crowd than what you get in the runoffs or in your divisions. And by and large, competitors answered that call. I was doing the commentary on the sportmartialarts.com stream with Mallory Woods. Anybody interested can go and check out that Battle of Atlanta finals with the commentary and everything on the sportmartialarts.com Facebook page. But we were talking some of these competitors, and we were getting little updates on our computers and everything. There was one competitor who it was his first, I believe it was Angel Perez from Puerto Rico. It was his first NASCA tournament ever. And he won the 13 and under boys forms overall grand championship, which is like, that doesn't happen. We don't hear about that. We don't hear about someone going from showing up at their very first NASCA event to winning the overall grand championship. And so he's just one example, but there were so many others that proved that when they're on stage under the big lights, that they can put on a show. Granted, there might be a little bit extra pressure that comes when you're at the US Open and you've got the ESPN boom cameras circling and all of the things that surround kind of the magic of US Open, as I describe it. But that is one thing that I was really impressed by, was seeing so many competitors able to step up. And so now, as someone who obviously has an intimate understanding of that selection process, like yourself, one of the promoters of the event, how many decisions are there still to be made going into the US Open? Because I have a feeling there's more spots up in the air this year than there has been in any other year ever, maybe.
Absolutely. And, it's even more compounded with, we have the ISKA world ratings, which cover the entire world. And we know, because of COVID and travel, that a lot of the international competitors aren't coming. So people that we'd normally be considering for different seedings, whether it's fighting, sparring, or forms, they're not going to be here. So those spots are available, right? Who are the defending champions? Well, you go back all the way to 19, yes, but that's 2 years ago, right? There is no 2020 defending champions, and the ratings from 2020 are only over 3 events. So there's a lot of uncertainty, and the last event other than the Battle of Atlanta was in September of last year, which was the Battle of Atlanta. So yeah, there's more opportunity. I think there's never been more opportunity for somebody to win their way into the finals than ever before.
And that is the exact quote that I wanted to pull out of that question, because that is something I know that a lot of competitors tune into the podcast, because at the end of the day, it is specifically a sport karate podcast. It's got my name in it, of course, right? And so for all the competitors tuning in, this year more than any other, you have a legitimate chance to win your way on stage at the US Open.
Just like Angel did, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, that guy, I was sitting next to the ladies from Fighter who sponsor him, and they don't sponsor anybody. And so I'm like, well, I've never heard of this kid, and you're sponsoring him? Well, now we know why, because he's really good, right? So yeah, I would think that it was great for him to do that before coming to the Open, because he is 11 years old. Yeah, might as well get in front of a bunch of people and a bunch of bright lights and get it done once before you have to do it again.
Absolutely. And that's exactly the right mentality. And any competitors, even if you missed the Battle of Atlanta, you didn't give yourself that opportunity. The fact that that happened at the Battle of Atlanta, the same thing could happen to a competitor with the right amount of talent that's been putting in the right amount of work. If they perform the day of the US Open in those Friday and Saturday eliminations, you will have an opportunity to win your way on stage. And I cannot stress enough how important that is, because, and a lot of people may not realize this just because it was so long ago, over a decade ago now, that was the way that I got on stage at US Open for the first time. When I made stage at the US Open for the first time, I had won 1 overall grand championship in my career. I'd been on stage a whole bunch, but I had only won 1 overall grand championship, and it was that February at the Compete Nationals. And I was, back then they did the gold medallion round, and I was able to win the gold medallion, which is kind of what put my name on the map in a way. But then when it came to getting on stage at the US Open, it was in my 13 and under CMX Weapons runoff division, where I gave the performance that ultimately kind of earned me the spot. And Mike Chat famously asked me what questions that I wanted him to ask me after my performance on stage. And I was like, sir, I don't even know if I'm on stage yet. And then that's when I kind of put 2 and 2 together. And so speaking of being on stage, and now more competitors than ever before should be prepared to step on stage, because oftentimes, going into the US Open, there are competitors who know they're going to be on for the most part, so they can make the right preparations. And there's competitors who know that it's unlikely, so they need to focus on their divisions and, getting their points for the NASKA circuit, so on and so forth. But now more than ever, there are more competitors that have a shot to make it, which means that more competitors than ever are now paying attention to all the little things that makes the Night of Champions different. Most notably, the requirement of the use of royalty-free music, which is something that the US Open Night of Champions is doing in order for increased media coverage, essentially, so that we're not using copyrighted music left and right that's going to interrupt streams and not allow certain things to be shown. So it's an excellent step forward in our sport as far as getting increased coverage and getting out there in the media goes. But I wanted to allow you to speak to that a little bit, and just kind of tell anybody listening about the royalty-free music requirement and the universalproductionmusic.com website that needs to be used to get your music for the potential Night of Champions.
If anybody thinks that they have a shot at being on TV, where it's a night of victory for the underbelts or the Night of Champions, there's been an increased enforcement of this. It started about 4 or 5 years ago. And, for the first 15 years on TV, nobody said a word. You can use any music you want. We're on ESPN, nobody said a word. But there's been a significantly heightened increase in enforcement of using copyrighted music. So you can't use it. And what that means is that even if you're just performing and your mom's posting it on Facebook, it's going to get yanked down. So again, like you said, for enhanced media coverage, if you want people to see your performance before it gets pulled down, then you need to use music that's not copyrighted, or you need to pay for the copyright, you need to pay for the rights. And that's not cheap. So what we have done is we've been doing for the last few years is working with a company like you mentioned them. We have sent an email to all of the potential black belt competitors and a good number of the under black belt competitors, showing them how they can access a library full of music that's not copyrighted. For, obviously, as you know, using music you've not been using all year long is difficult, but it is what it is. If you want your performance to stay live on any social media site and certainly be live streamed, you can't use copyrighted music or it'll be in violation, it'll be pulled down. So since we were doing ESPN made it clear we can't do it. So we can't even allow the performance because we're now assuming some liability for doing that. Again, if you're posting your kid doing it, then the only person that's going to be liable is the parent. But since there's no real commercial gain to the mom, you're not going to get sued for any, potential profits you're making. For us, because we're a televised event with sponsors on our, national, international network, then we can't afford to be in a position where we could be sued by somebody. And it doesn't even really matter if it's even whether it's legalities or not. They're going to pull it down. We're just not going to get any exposure. It'll just be gone so fast that most people won't see it. So if you want it, you have to have it for the Night of Champions. You absolutely have to have it. Night of Victory, a little harder to determine because it's not the same caliber. We don't even know who's going to win because it could be a green belt. We don't know. That would be up on stage. But certainly the folks that are policing this are looking for anything that's copyrighted music. They don't care who you are. And Absolutely. It'll get pulled down. So just if you really want it up there and you want it to stay, then you better go to the site. If you have any questions, you can contact. Go to the website, ask for information. We'll send you a nice long list of instructions of what to do, where to go, how to click, all that kind of stuff. We've been doing it for a few years now, so it's pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple. And pick some music and work on your form before then, and get used to running to that music.
Absolutely. And from the competitor's perspective, one thing that I want to kind of give a public service announcement to all the other competitors tuning in here is that at the end of the day, being a champion is also about being able to adapt to whatever circumstance that you're given. So if you're one of those people who thinks that like my music is a huge part of routine and it tells my story or whatever. I felt that way at one point too, because I was somebody who always used specific lyrics in my introductions and stuff like that. But then I've won my past, I've won 3 straight. I think 2 of them were with the royalty-free music rules. So it's like, it's not going to interrupt your competitive success to use the royalty-free music because everybody else on stage is using the royalty-free music as well. So it's not like you're going to be at any type of a disadvantage. And what I was saying about adaptability is that that's part of being a champion. You have to be able to adapt, find a song that works. Even one year there was a time where the right song was played for me, but it was like the wrong part of the song. And I just had to go with it anyway. You know what I mean? So,
or if you break the bow in half, you run into screamer form.
Exactly, right. Which that's still a disqualification under NASKA rules, which is another debate for another day. But I digress on that one. And so for anybody that needs to go and find their music, now here's something that I wanted to point out because there was some confusion around this. So competitors that are going to be in the Friday and Saturday eliminations. I don't think there's any musical divisions for black belts on Saturday, so that's somewhat irrelevant. But those Friday eliminations with the musical divisions, competitors are allowed to still use whatever music they want. Is that correct? Even if it's copyrighted? Now, if if there's an ESPN camera or whatever that happens to be around the arena, obviously they're going to lose the opportunity to get filmed for any type of B-roll coverage or anything like that if they're using copyrighted music, but they do have the option. Whereas in the Night of Champions, there is no debating. You cannot use copyrighted music. It must be the royalty free from that specific website.
That's correct. And when we were airing the last few events live, you can't just cut somebody out. If we were doing post-production, we can just take the whole performance out of the show, which is sad, especially if it's a really good one, but we would never air in a post-produced show what we know is a violation of the copyright. So, but yes, we would never allow them to even up on stage unless they had the right music. Absolutely. And I think it was 3 years ago, 2 years ago, I think 3 years ago, where we got this and said you can't do that, and we had to overdub everybody's forms with copyright-free music. Mm-hmm. Not the best, because when you do that, you take out some of the audience noise. So it doesn't sound right, but we had no choice. We were, that was the year it started and said, you will not do this anymore. Mm-hmm. And so then from then on, if you really want the performance to look good and sound right, it has to be that music, and you can't get on stage without it.
Absolutely. And this is something that I think that a lot of the viewers may not have recognized that. And I think that we should have a level of respect for those of you who are putting on the event because of the extent to which you guys work to be able to put our sport on a pedestal. It
Yeah.
was a ton of extra work to go in post and try to put in royalty-free music on top of forms that had already happened and were already choreographed to different music.
That's a lot
But
of work.
you guys and your team did it so that our sport could still be featured and get that enhanced media coverage. And that is something that everybody, fans, parents, competitors, coaches, judges, whatever, if you are a member of the sport karate community, you should have the utmost level of respect for anybody that is working that hard to get our sport seen by the masses, because that is the number one thing we need, is that we are an extremely exciting sport that is currently not viewed by enough people. And so the more eyeballs we can get on it, the better. That's why Black Belt Magazine, spoiler alert, is going to have some enhanced media coverage coming up at the US Open. So everybody stay tuned for that. We've got some exciting announcements that I can't let slip just yet. But stay tuned, because Black Belt Magazine is going to be doing some really, really exciting things with the US Open this year. But I digress. So once again, if you need to find that music, if you think that you have a chance to make it to the Night of Champions, or if you just want to use the royalty-free music so that you can be covered for your eliminations or what have you, it is universalproductionmusic.com. You're going to want to go to that website. There's a subscription that you need to purchase in order to be able to have access to some of the content. And then that is the website that you have to use to be able to access that music. Anything to add as far as the process of getting the music, or does that pretty much cover it? Go to that website and follow the rules.
Yeah, and pick one. The biggest challenge was making sure you don't pick one somebody else is, but I think they have a process for that too. So they have a ton of music. Just you'll find something guaranteed, and then just download it, start running your form to that, get used to it. So when you show up to the Open, it won't take long. You can do it in a few days probably. So just get it done.
Absolutely. Excellent advice. And thank you very much for that background, because I know that's something that a lot of competitors were having discussions about and asking questions about at the Battle of Atlanta, kind of in preparation for US Open. And so we talk about the enhanced media coverage. As of right now, what are the streaming platforms that are going to be providing coverage of the US Open? I know some years ESPN's been live, other years it's been a rebroadcast. I know there's other companies that get involved in the streaming and the broadcasting of the event. So for fans that for whatever reason maybe aren't able to make it to the US Open this year, but they still want to tune in and they want to watch the action, what all entities are going to be streaming the event this year?
We haven't actually finished determining that. There were some meetings that Mike Sawyer was having with others to try to determine exactly how we're going to do it this year, since things are different. Don't know, but stay tuned. We'll have something, we'll announce something soon, hopefully by the end of this week, and we'll be able to tell people how we're broadcasting the event.
Okay, excellent. So everybody that's watching this right now, make sure you stay tuned. I presume that that's something that Black Belt will probably be making. Black Belt Magazine will be making a post about and sharing, hey, this is where to watch it. Absolutely, we will be. And then also stay tuned to the US Open ISKA World Martial Arts Championships Facebook page, because that's going to be the first place that has all those updates for everybody that's curious about the event, whether you're going to be there, whether you're trying to watch from home. Make sure that you guys are staying tuned to their official Facebook page. And so now I want to get a little bit more into the action that's going to be taking place. Historically, the US Open broadcast has always very heavily featured forms and weapons and the exciting, flashy routines, as well as some excellent traditional routines as well. And the breaking has always been a huge, huge part of the broadcast, whether it was Chip Townsend setting a world record or a power breaking division that was going down, or those are always the things that have gotten very prominent features at the US Open. But then one element of sport karate that's always been a little bit different, and US Open has experimented with a new thing here and a new thing there, is the point fighting part of our sport. In the past, there's been clash sparring events that have been kind of debuted at the US Open. So at this time, are there any expectations that you can provide for what point fighting events we might see on stage at the Night of Champions? Will that be runoff between whoever happens to win in the brackets and the eliminations at the tournament? Is that something that will be invitation only? What information do you have about what point fighters can expect going into the US Open?
Nothing specific. because we like to see how the fighting kind of ends up. For example, if they're doing team fighting is always great. We love to have team fighting because it's very exciting, very intense, because one match depends on the next match because it just builds in anticipation. But if it's Paul Mitchell against Paul Mitchell, then sometimes it's just, well, we'll put it up there, but it's not going to be as good as if it's two teams that really don't like each other, and then some of the finals, we have a particularly good set of grand championships or something like that. Yes. And unfortunately, with some of the best fighters in the world in Europe not being able to make it, and some of them on the Paul Mitchell team, then, we don't know. But there were some great fights in Atlanta. I was very pleased at the caliber of the fighters and the action. I just, with point sparring, it's an unknown entity. People get in the ring and sometimes they bounce around. They look at each other for 2 minutes and you're like, okay, so you better do a lot of talking because there's not a lot of action. But I'll tell you, Atlanta, there was a ton of action. They fought. So as long as that happens, if we get that kind of fighting, that's what we want is, real, let's go win. Let's just not try not to lose and go after it. Bailey looked great. Mouse looked great. So I don't see any reason why we wouldn't try to pick quite a few of the fights. And we'll probably just, because like you said, we talked about earlier, probably just go to the finals and see what the grands are and bring them to the stage, the final team match and a couple of the grands, stuff like that. Because there really isn't, with some of the folks from Europe not being here, we're not really worried about seeding people or stuff like that because some of the defending champions and whatnot are not even here. So we'll probably bring them right out of the tournament.
Right. And you dropped a name there that I want to emphasize because a couple of reasons. Number one, he's a friend of the show. We've had Bailey Murphy on the show, I think 2 or 3 times now. And not to mention the fact he looked fantastic at Battle of Atlanta. He showed up at Battle of Atlanta as if he was trying to prove that he was the best point fighter on the planet. And a lot of people that weren't tuning in to all the little streams and everything that was going on from Atlanta, not only was Bailey undefeated, but as he was working his way through the open weight bracket, which I watched in its entirety, he's got a 7-point spread on almost every opponent through those eliminations. Wow. Like he wasn't just winning, he was dominating people left and right. He faced Brandon Ballou twice, once in the open weight final on his side of the bracket to ultimately get the matchup against Coca Guzman. And Brandon gave him a good fight, kept that closer. And then Brandon Ballou kept the fight close on stage as well when they fought as I believe it was that was their ultimate fighting championship after Bailey beat Yolskar, the 30-plus winner, and then Bailey and Brandon got to go head-to-head for that big overall title. Brandon was one of the few fighters all weekend who was able to keep it close, which makes Brandon look good when the U.S. Open starts to look at, who's going to wind up fighting. Absolutely. And you talk about team fights, Bailey and Brandon teamed up with Tyson Ray, a new fighter, he's not a new fighter, but a new adult fighter that made his debut in Atlanta. Looked really sharp. He was wearing a next level uniform, but fighting with Team Straight Up, of course. So yes, lots of exciting point fighting going on, and I think that is something that the sport really needs. Like you mentioned, you don't want to get up there and see a couple of fighters that are bouncing around for 2 minutes and not really doing a whole lot. You want fighters that are active, and so if you are a point fighter coming to the U.S. Open in the adult division, number one, you just heard Mike McCoy say it, they're going to look and see who's in the grands. Fight your way into the grands. If you want to be on TV, if you want to be on stage, earn your way into the grand championship. And if you can, try to be flashy while you're at it. Try to put on a show, and that's going to increase your likelihood of being selected to be on that broadcast. Exactly. But I digress. So we've talked a lot about the Night of Champions because, of course, that's probably the thing that has the most intrigue. But now I want to talk about the rest of the event because that's what everybody is coming to compete in the first place, is the eliminations, regardless of how far you make it. So many sport karate athletes just love the thrill of competing regardless of what level it's at. And at the U.S. Open, you're competing in some of the largest divisions, if not the largest divisions, that you will find in all of sport karate in this era, right? And so let's talk a little bit about the schedule for Friday and Saturday competition. We don't have to go into specifics of traditional forms is going to happen at this time. That's not what I mean. But I know in the past, U.S. Open's done a synchronized division on Thursday and things of that nature. So just kind of clarify for everyone that's going to be attending the U.S. Open, what is that schedule going to look like? What are start times looking like on Friday? And what all type of action can we expect between Friday and Saturday?
So we posted the schedule now, and there's nothing on Thursday. with a reduced attendance. We didn't need to make people come in a day early. We give them, Thursday just a day to just get to town and relax. And then Friday morning, we start with team competition, what we call specialty divisions like self-defense and stuff like that. So the first couple hours, we'll do team demo, team sync, self-defense, all that kind of stuff. And so then by 11:30, we'll jump into the individual creative CMX and traditional weapons divisions, followed by CMX forms divisions. And then we'll do, like we've done in many, many years in the past, we'll do continuous sparring on Friday night, close out Friday night with continuous sparring. We'll have already done team sparring in the morning. That's one of the team events in the morning. And then on Saturday, it's kind of your old traditional tournament, traditional forms, point sparring and clash sparring, which is the one that we do. So you'll have, if you're a fighter, you have two different events you can do on Friday and two different events you can do on Saturday. And then if you're almost all of the forms competitors will do traditional forms on Saturday. It's always the biggest of all the forms divisions. So we move that to Saturday because they're usually huge, right? So it's pretty much that how, and we had it kind of in phases where there are different age groups early on, followed by other age groups, and that still is going to how it's going to be. But I think Battle tried that, and they got all a little out of sequence or out of schedule because they just had so many people. I mean, I think they had probably 250, 300 people more than they thought. So that's a good thing. So I've warned my team, be ready. Be ready to ad lib as we go.
Absolutely. And that is something that I'm excited about is we're expecting a big turnout at US Open, obviously because of the circumstances surrounding the pandemic, maybe not as big as some years past, but certainly a large event. And that's something that everybody should come prepared for. And we're going to get to this in a moment. But for anybody that is still worried, maybe you haven't gotten your vaccine yet, you've still got some concerns about COVID-19 protocols and things of that nature. Disney does a very good job of trying to keep tabs on all those things. And we're going to get to that here in just a moment. But one thing that I wanted to discuss, there were 2 points there that I wanted to highlight because a lot of competitors or at least back when we were having tournaments all the time, get into the kind of monotony of the schedule where typically 2-day tournaments start Friday evenings. The US Open is starting Friday morning. So that's something very, very important when you're finalizing your travel plans and everything.
Yes, be here Thursday.
Yes, be there Thursday because Friday morning is when everything is going to be getting started. And then also for forms and weapons competitors, most of the time we run traditional weapons on Saturday at many events. At US Open, and it's been like this for several years now, traditional weapons is on Friday. So be prepared for that. Don't let that
we will run all weapons on Friday, and we will try to run as many grand runoffs as we can on Friday to at least narrow down that field, as we talked about earlier, as to who's going to be on stage. So we'll have weapons and team fighting. We'll have some of the show finished by Friday night saying, okay, here's from Friday what goes in the show Saturday night. And then on Saturday, we'll determine the rest of it. But for the most part, CMX forms, CMX weapons, all done by Friday night.
Absolutely. And that's another important note is that if you are a weapons competitor, be prepared to run all the way through your grand championships on Friday. Oftentimes you can win a couple divisions Friday night and then, relax knowing that you're going to do your runoff or do your grands the next day. Not at US Open. That might be the case depending on how the schedule works out, but most likely what is going to happen is you will run your grand championships and they're going to get everything done they can on Friday.
If we can, we will.
Absolutely. So all competitors need to be prepared for that. I cannot stress that enough. Preparation is everything. As a competitor, I've always been someone who visualizes what it's going to be like in the arena, what day it is, the time of day it's going to be, so that I can fully immerse myself in that moment before I'm ever there. And that makes me more prepared to be at my best. And that's something that I think that every single competitor should do is visualize what that moment is going to feel like. And that starts with knowing when your divisions are going to happen and what's going to happen in what order, right? And so now getting away from the divisions and the competition side of everything, one of the cool things about the US Open is that there's always other special features that are going on around the event. For example, Black Belt Magazine, for audiences tuning in, we will have a booth at the US Open. Like I said earlier, there will be strong representation of Black Belt Magazine at the event. So Mr. McCoy, if you could, what are some of those big vendors and some special things that might be going on aside from just the tournament that those that are attending will see at the US Open?
Well, of course, we'll have the on Friday the USBA Breaking Championships in the Fiesta Ballroom, and he's got a pretty good attendance. I was pretty impressed at how many people are actually going to show up. And then, of course, on Saturday, we're doing the ISKA World Breaking Championships. It'll be in the Fiesta Ballroom this time and not on the stage, just because it's going to be a lot easier to do it there. But it's still for the ISKA World titles in breaking. And I know for a fact those guys can break as much in that ballroom floor as they can on the stage. There's no difference to them as far as, their ability to break, 16 versus 17 slabs with an elbow strike. The difference is that my elbow would break, theirs doesn't. So that's going to go on. Not a lot of other specialty stuff. We weren't approved for any close contact competition. So grappling and sport MMA was not approved. I think it would have been approved as of today, but that was way too late to determine if we should even, provide it, right? Which is sad. But, a lot of our big participants, especially the South Africans that love that kind of stuff, they can't make it. South Africa is still, the rest of the world is still way behind us in beating this thing. So they're not coming. Their governments aren't letting anybody go anywhere. Our government's not letting anybody come from anywhere. So, we're kind of like they're inside the U.S. We're pretty good. Inside Florida, we're real good. Everywhere else, not so much. So some of those things just wouldn't have been successful anyways because of the people who participate are not going to be here. Of course, Century will be there with their booth and all their stuff, and they're great supporters of the event, and they have fantastic equipment. And anybody who hasn't seen all of what Century has to offer in their equipment is just, they're missing out. It's a lot of great stuff. So that's pretty much it. And you guys, I don't think Paul Mitchell's going to have much of a presence, but in the past, they would have several stylists there doing people's hair, which was always fun. They have lots of photos of people getting their hair done. And it's just a fun thing for the crowd. So that's pretty much it for this year. Again, scaled back significantly because, again, we weren't even given approval to this event until 3 months ago or 4 months ago. So it's just the way it is. Now, things have gotten much better. Disney will be pretty much dialing all this stuff back here pretty quick. Right now, for guests, no masks are required. So all the distancing and stuff that we were arranging the event to accommodate as of tomorrow or Friday will probably all be gone. So that is fireworks are back. So you're coming in on Thursday, starting on July 1st. Go enjoy, you can look out your window and Magic Kingdom and Epcot are both going to have fireworks. So it's going to be the first time in 16 months we've done fireworks.
That is awesome. I love to hear that. I know especially a lot of the junior competitors coming to the event will be excited to see those, Disney fireworks that add to the magic. Yep. So there will be, Century will be there. Great shout out to them. Black Belt Magazine will be there with a booth and some media coverage. And those special announcements that I'm kind of teasing, those will be coming out in the, in the days leading up to the US Open. So absolutely stay tuned for that. And so you mentioned, the reason that all of these scale backs and everything are happening, the elephant in the room is the COVID-19 pandemic. I've been to Disney on a couple of trips to Orlando since the pandemic started. And I think that Disney has done an incredible job kind of keeping tabs on the COVID-19 situation and doing everything they can to keep their guests safe. So for those that will be attending the US Open, are there any restrictions to be expected? What is it on the Disney side of things, being at the Coronado Springs Resort, that the guests to the US Open can expect?
Officially, as of a couple of weeks ago, the only requirements, you have to wear a mask on Disney transportation, right? So if you're on a bus, you got to put a mask on. Inside the hotels, the convention centers, in the park, it was outside. Now it's inside. Restaurants have what they call reasonable distancing, whatever the heck that is, which just means if you feel. What it means is they have to accommodate people that don't want to necessarily be jammed right up against somebody. So they're trying to be understanding that now after all this time, people don't want to be stuck next to each other. So allow people to establish a little distance, right? As long as you're vaccinated, you can go without a mask inside and outside. They're not going to ask you if you've been vaccinated. They're going to go in the honor system. So you should be continuing to wear a mask, but most of all the restrictions for guests have been removed, and for our cast members, a good portion of them removed, and we think a good number of them will be removed before the event. So there'll be almost nothing. I don't anticipate a rollback on the transportation requirements before the event, but it might. I mean, they're rolling it back pretty quick and we have had a phenomenal success record. We have to report all of our COVID cases at the end of the year to OSHA. for the number of transmissions of COVID at the workplace. And we have thousands and thousands of employees, and we had a handful because of our strict requirements and protocols. And we're not letting anybody violate those. We've been very good about all of our cast outs and wearing face shields and face coverings and really doing everything they can to not spread the virus or get the virus themselves. So we've been exceptional. And we're slower sometimes to back off out of those mitigations than some of the other places are, because we're a big group. There's hundreds of thousands of people on property every day. I mean, if it got out of hand, it could be ugly, right? So we're not letting that happen. And it has not happened. We opened July 11th. I think you were there July 13th. And we have been absolutely almost bulletproof since the day we reopened.
That is excellent. I think that'll be comforting for a lot of people coming to the US Open that maybe haven't gotten out much to hear. And regardless of where any of our viewers coming to the US Open, regardless of where you are on the COVID comfort spectrum, sure. I think it's great to hear that, that Disney is lightening a lot of the restrictions for those of you that are watching that may want to have a little bit more freedom with wearing a mask or not wearing a mask and things of that nature. But at the same time, as Mr. McCoy said, they are still making accommodations for those that don't feel comfortable. You'll be able to be distanced when you're dining and things of that nature. And I think that that's great to hear as well, that those accommodations are available.
Yeah, they know there's people that are uncomfortable, right? There's not even, I've seen people that have been vaccinated wearing masks. Mm-hmm. It's just when you get to the point where you feel comfortable, that's all that matters, right? And we want to make sure everybody feels comfortable. Now, there's always been those that don't want to wear the mask, didn't want to wear it from the first day, right? Great, now you don't have to. But there's those that just don't feel that way. So you got to make provisions for everybody, make everybody feel safe and comfortable.
Absolutely. So now we're going to move on from the COVID discussion because I think everybody wants to move on from COVID in general, right?
No kidding.
And so now I'm going to ask you an easy question that might be difficult to answer, but we'll see here. And it is simply, what are you most excited for at this year's event? What are you most looking forward to?
Well, after watching the battle and the way it was set up, we've reduced to 21 rings. I think I'm excited or nervous about running the US Open in 21 rings because we might have a better attendance than possible. But I think the most thing that excited me the most about the battle that I'm expected, but what I'm excited about is just to see all the kids that have moved up to the adults. I'm always excited to see that, right? That's just, to me, how will they do in now a field that has people that's been in there for 20 years, right? Then instead of every 2 years, they're against everybody. That's kind of like the catch-all. Everybody ends up there and they all compete there until they feel like they're too old and they move up to the senior division, right? But so I'm very excited to see that transition because there's been, these kids have changed 2 years. They've completely changed divisions, right? But also the talent level. I was very impressed at Battle, so I feel very good. There's a little girl that won 13 and under girls. She won everything, so she ran a form just as a demonstration by herself because she has nobody to compete against. And she was unbelievable. I've never seen her before. And I got to judge her during the day, and I swear to God, I almost thought I was going to fall down. But that was beautiful. That was magnificent. And then I went and talked to her later, and she's out of Rick and Sue Diaz's school up in New York. Joey Castro's her instructor. And apparently she's gotten some mixed feedback on her form and, not necessarily real positive. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. That's one of the most emotional forms I've ever seen. It's just so good. So I don't know, like Little Angel, never seen a kid before in my life, and really good. So that's always, every year, you just never know who shows up that you've never seen before. It's one thing to see Mason and Haley just move right into the adults and just keep winning like they were in 15 to 17. But it's another thing to just see somebody completely out of the blue. And this year, there's more opportunity to see that than any other year. So that's probably the most exciting thing, is if people are ready to come back, this is the best opportunity ever, the best year ever, to get on stage with one great performance, right? And there's a bunch of them out there. We just don't see them.
Absolutely. No, and to name drop a few names there. So Maddie Kenaway was the name of that girl who wound up winning the Grand. And one thing that was so impressive about her, and I didn't even realize this until after we finished doing the night show and everything, but it's not like she won the CMX Forms Grand Championship and the traditional Forms Grand Championship with a CMX form or a stereotypical CMX form and extreme routine, and then her traditional routine. she was able to win both of those divisional grand championships with a traditional form. It's just in the CMX division, creative musical extreme. She ran a musical traditional form and was able to beat out all of the extreme and creative competitors with the form in the divisional round, so that she didn't even have to worry about them on stage, which is incredibly difficult to do. And so she was able to get the shutout there. She is a member of Team KTOC, as you mentioned, a student of Joey Castro and under Rick and Sue Diaz. And I was extremely impressed by her as well. She did an incredible job. And then another thing that I love about the US Open is the storylines. And so we talk about Mason and Haley, but we're also guaranteed to get some great storylines in their respective matchups, because Mason is going to slide into this rivalry that has been born between Joey Castro and Ariel Torres, if Ariel Torres is able to attend and he's not already focused on going off to the Olympics, right? But either way, we're going to get someone who has been a champion of the adult division for several years in Ariel or Joey in that Japanese forms division, against the newcomer to the adult division, Mason Stowell. And then on the women's side of things, for the CMX forms and weapons, we're going to have Haley coming up to challenge Sammy Smith, who is still an active competitor, has been very vocal on social media about her desire to be back out there. And she did not compete at Battle of Atlanta. She'll be making her return to the sport at the US Open. And so there's that storyline of Haley Glass versus Sammy Smith that gets very, very interesting. And that's one thing that I love about the US Open, is kind of studying all these storylines going into the event. Before we move on to the final question, any other names, maybe not somebody that you've never seen before, but just people you were impressed by at Battle of Atlanta as we move into the US Open?
Well, one of the things I'm excited to see is I'm excited to see how like a Connor Chastain will do against somebody like you. So I expect that the both of you will be competing Saturday night on stage, and we'll see who wins.
Absolutely. And still to be determined if I will be out there or not. But I will say I've got a lot of respect for Connor. He's a great competitor. And throughout a lot of my career, some of my greatest rivals, if you will, many of them were friendly rivals, or I think all of them were friendly rivals. But throughout my career, it was always a comma competitor, right? Early on, it was Austin Crane, and then there was Tyler Weaver, and then there was Cole Presley. And really, Tyler and Cole kind of overlapped there as well. Even when I was a junior, it was Mackenzie Emery, a comma competitor, when boys and girls were still against one another, right? Right. Maybe Connor can write his name down as kind of the next challenger for me.
Your next comma competitor,
right? But anyway, so we'll see. I have not reached a final decision yet. But I will say that Battle of Atlanta has influenced me. I won't say which way it's influenced me, but it has influenced me one way or the other. So to be determined. But last thing that I want to get to here, and this has been a hot topic, and one thing that I love about the state of sport karate right now is how much of this goes on, whether it's here on the Jackson Rudolph podcast. Martial Arts Internetwork does a great job. They've got 3 or 4 different shows running right now, most notably Inside Scoop with Alex Dingman and Jeff Dawes, as well as the CTE podcast with Travis Plowden, Chris Walker, Carlos Tierney. SportMartialArts.com has been doing amazing coverage. Point Fighter Live seems to be doing live streams almost every single day with some type of content. So Alex Reyes does an incredible job with them for sure. And so one thing I love about sport karate right now is that there's more discussion than there's ever been. And one of the most important discussions that takes place is, what is the future of sport karate? What do we need to do as a community to continue this momentum and keep making sport karate bigger and better, so that our athletes can receive more financial compensation for their efforts, so that our athletes can, receive more fame and feel like they're one of the best in the world when they win one of these titles, because, people notice them at Disney World and say, oh, hey, you're so-and-so, like, can we get a picture, right? Because those things happen in our sport, but they're few and far between, because we're still big fish in a small pond, so to speak. Right. And so the way that you see it, what can the US Open in particular do to continue to grow that pond, to continue to improve the future of sport karate?
Well, it's been a simple formula, one that we've been working on for several years, is not just televising the Open, but televising a series of events. You can't build popularity and fan base on one event a year. There might be a bunch of people get a whole bunch of new fans and stuff right after the Open, but if there's no other events to follow them on, then there's just no reason to follow them until next year. There's nothing to follow. So our goal is to get multiple events televised, with sponsorship, to bring incredibly talented, competitors that we have in front of the general public, not just our, martial arts community, but in front of the general public, so they can respect, they can see what the talent they have, and they will follow it. They will, because it's just like gymnastics or ice skating or the other type performance-based sports. The skill is there. It's just, they just need exposure. They just need to be available to be seen more often. And luckily there's more platforms now than ever to get that to happen. But it's just finding that right combination of sponsorship and the right events, and having a multiple series of events where the fan base can build one event after the other and just keep going. And the next thing you know, we have millions of people following our top athletes. Absolutely. And they can make a living doing it. Right? You need to make a few $100,000 a year, so you can just do that like the other professional athletes are. You shouldn't have to. I mean, you can, if you want to, right? Do something, go to college, whatever, but you shouldn't have to. If you wanted to be a professional athlete, just like a professional stunt person, you should be able to do that.
I love that. I think that's an excellent vision. That is the vision that I have for the sport as well. And I think that that's another really important concept that we should be focused on is unity, right? Yeah. Unifying the vision of sport karate and making sure that all of these people who want sport karate to be better have a unified vision for what the sport should be. And I think that everybody can agree that athletes should be able to choose, I want to be a professional sport karate competitor. That is my career. That is what is going to provide for myself and my family. And I think that US Open and the projects that US Open is working on to get more coverage for more events, to develop those fan bases, I think that that is essential to that process. And as a competitor and as someone who loves this sport and as someone whose character was shaped by this sport, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that you and so many others on your team are working to make that a reality for these competitors. Because, even if the timetable works out and I never have an opportunity to feel those benefits, I want the next generation right behind me to be able to reap all of those rewards. And I'll maybe feel like at least I was a little bitty part of that by being, one of the best when I was and when I am, trying to mix the past and the present.
And it's people like you that we built this on, right? Caitlin, Mackenzie, you and Reed. The response from the ESPN executives and from the audience to the things that you guys do is what gives us hope that we can do this. They recognize and go, geez, they watch you guys for the first time. They're like, what the heck was that? Right. So all we just need is the break. The talent's there. You guys are there. There's no doubt about it. You can hold your own with any sport there is, but we just need the break to get enough events to build a base to where now we have the ratings. There's years we've had better ratings in our one show than hockey had. It's just that good, and it appeals to a larger demographic. So from a sponsorship perspective, we're a little confusing because of that diverse demographic, but at the same time, there's enough of each of the specific demographic a particular sponsor might be looking for that can make them interested in the sport. And if we have a big enough draw, then I think we can make it work.
That is awesome. So very optimistic vibes going out as we come to the close of this podcast. For those of you tuning in, first and foremost, thank you so much for taking the time to tune into the show. If you enjoyed this, feel free, go ahead, hit that share button. That's how we get the podcast out there and get more people tuning in and listening to and learning about sport karate, which is ever so important. If you have any thoughts or you have any questions, go ahead, drop those in the comment section down below. I greatly appreciate that. And the Black Belt Magazine page will be, monitoring that to be sure that any questions, especially about the US Open in particular, get responded to. So if you have questions, go ahead and drop those down in the comment section down below. And lastly, Mr. McCoy, thank you so much for your time. This has been a great episode, all types of excellent information for the athletes, for the parents, for the spectators, for sport karate fans that are going to be tuning in from home. So much in this episode. So I say this every week, but if you're somebody that's tuning in at the end, go ahead, rewind this episode and go and watch back some more of it so that you can get all of this excellent information that's been shared. I'm Jackson Rudolph. This has been episode 72 of the Jackson Rudolph podcast, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks.